I was going to start by asking you about your priorities for the second term. Since we just spent almost an hour talking with our listeners about people's concerns about the about Donald Trump, frankly, how worried are you? How worried should we be in Boston? What do you think?
We've been worrying for a year now, and it's unfortunately not going to let up. I think there are many ways in which it's still going to get a lot worse before it gets better over the next 3 years. And so we're preparing for every unthinkable circumstance. We are getting together with other cities, trading notes, preparing our legal plans together. We're engaging with sectors across the city. And my hope is that in all of this, right, I worry, I stay up at night. Sometimes I wake up worrying about the basic life safety of our residents, the sense that our city is going to have a future with all of our key industries under attack. And then I'm worrying about those things instead of the other things that we should be focused on at the city level and that we can make a real difference on if we're not getting pulled into using all of our energy just fighting to stay where we are and batting back every new funding threat or physical threat. So there's just a lot happening, and if anything else, I am trying to get us to use the moment, the need to all band together to actually create space to additionally solve the challenges that we've needed to solve for a long time. Many of these issues are decades in the making. They might be brought to the forefront by some horrific act by the federal government, whether it's on food security or public safety or education. But underneath it, there are things that we've been needing to address, hard questions, resource-challenged situations that we have to build momentum to get done anyway.
Have you spoken to Mayor Fry of Minneapolis since Renee Good was killed?
I have. We've exchanged some messages, yes.
And
Yeah.
what kind of conversation have you had?
Just very quick. Making sure that they know that in Boston, we stand with Minneapolis and we're here to try to support however we can. But in fact, next week, there's the annual winter meeting of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, so I'll be going down to D.C. then. I'm in some conversations and going to be talking about Boston's experience and our approach on public safety, on housing, on some technology-related issues. And then we are specifically hosting a session along with the Public Rights Project for large cities and other partners to band together around a real strategy on how to manage this moment.
When you say band together around, by the way, the number is 877-301-8970 to call or text, or see Zoe if you're at the library. Band together for a real strategy. I don't, as you know much better than we do, there are 6 times as many federal agents in Minneapolis as there are police officers. I assume they wouldn't send 12,000 here, but that's a comparable number. How do you prepare for this kind of lawlessness and violence? And what does preparation even mean, Mayor?
There are notes being taken and shared from the official government entities, whether that's how the police department has had to adapt and find new ways to support their residents. There are notes from activist groups and community members who are now facing unspeakable risks to their safety alongside everyone who is being targeted. And then there's the push to try to work together on a strategy in the courts to head off as much as possible. Right? So there's always a lag when you go through the court system, but so far, in many cases, whether it's victories that have been won, saying that withdrawal or cancellation of funding has been against federal policy and federal law, or even the Constitution, or the deployments in Los Angeles, in Chicago of National Guard or border control, border agents have violated the law in other ways. When these communities are acting together and when we can join in their cases ahead of time, that helps extend the protection across the country as well when the decisions do start to come down.
We're talking to Mayor Wu, 877-301-8970.
So, do you want to, before we get to the calls, besides this concern about what the federal government is doing, what are you looking for in term 2 in Boston?
We are we're well in the 250th year of our American democracy, and so the eyes of the world will be on Boston in a lot of different instances, and we have an important story to tell as the keeper of American values from our very founding, as the place that has helped define the public good and what it means to stand up for public amenities like schools and parks and transit and education writ large. And so we have to be a city that is the leading example of delivering the highest quality of life for our residents, and that means focusing on city services, getting our repaving and crosswalk painting and street lights and trash pickup and schools, safety better than ever, fine-tuning all of our processes, improving and streamlining permitting so that anything that our residents want to do is not going to be hindered by city government, whether that's throwing a block party or a special event, whether that is building a new home or adding a deck on to enjoy your home more, or whether that's opening a new business and contributing to our economy here. And then we are focused on the future, investing in our schools and making sure that our innovation ecosystem here that is under severe attack from every angle, in fact, is strengthened and finds new wind in the next era.
You know, just one thing about the schools. The Globe did a piece talking about how the population of children drops by 1/2 in Boston when the kids turn 5, which means that people are leaving, at least some of them, because of the schools. I mean, so many, you know, and I've heard this, I've been around here forever, and the biggest problem for a lot of middle-class families, and the Boston schools are predominantly not middle-class families anymore, is they can afford to move elsewhere and they leave because they don't know. They want to go to school across the street. They don't want to live in Hyde Park and go to school in Brighton. You know, the school, lack of neighborhood schools. Are we ever going to see the ability to buy a house? Because middle-class people are leaving. Middle-class people would... It's unfair to say this, but the middle-class systems function better than systems that are predominantly people who are struggling financially. I mean, it would make such a difference. Is that ever going to happen?
We've been making a lot of investments in the Boston Public Schools over the last 4 years that are meant to deliver on one, not just stabilizing the district after a period of tremendous transition and disruption. You know, when Superintendent Skipper started, we had just come off of having 5 superintendents over the course of 7 years and a lot of turnover. So getting our core systems and foundation strengthened. But then the vision that we're going to deliver on of making the country's oldest public school system the best at BPS means that for every family, the best school for them should be just down the block in their public school. Because we know people, when given the choice, often want to have a convenient walk to school, or to be able to have the comfort and community of knowing everyone from being able to have all of the participation of families made easier without long commutes. But where we are as a district now is because we haven't had that quality uniformly across our city and all of its neighborhoods. And you don't have to go back too many decades to see the depth of segregation,
Yep.
of inequalities within resource allocation, within the choices that families were being given in terms of high quality options. And so we have invested in creating the specific types of seats that meet our students' needs. And then when seats aren't meeting our students' needs because the schools are severely under-enrolled or they're too small and therefore not able to offer a full range of AP classes and extracurriculars, we have to make some hard choices about how to right-size the footprint of the district in that way too. And so all these efforts of finding the high-quality student experience, providing the services that follow the students rather than segregating them in specific places to then have students have to chase the services when they need particular individualized education interventions for disabilities or for other needs. That should be available in every neighborhood and connected to each community. And that's what we're going to do in the next 4 years.
Let's take some calls at 877-301-8970. Steve is in New Hampshire. Hi, Steve.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Good.
Jim, by the way, I'm a Trump supporter, and I listen to you every day. So.
Thank you. Good. Glad you do. Call us
I just
sometime.
have quick questions. I call in all the time, but I got a question for the mayor. It might
Sure.
be a governor question, but my son is a licensed plumber in New Hampshire and in Maine. If he wants to take a license in Massachusetts, he has to take the 5-year course all over again. Why can't he just take the test, study the material, take the test? Why does he have to do the 5-year course?
Do you know anything about that or no?
I think it was cutting out a little bit, but I think this is about the license to carry.
No,
No.
a
It's a
plumber.
license to be a plumber.
He wants to know why his son.
licensed
Sorry.
plumber.
This
Okay,
This isn't
great
the
got it.
connection.
Steve. This isn't the Steve I know, is it?
Whatever.
Okay, got it. So,
think it is.
Professional licensure is a state issue, so that's correct on that front. And I don't know too much. What the city has been doing in certain spaces is if there are ways where we can help translate some of the credentials. Often we've been talking about the healthcare space because there's been such a need, but similarly here in the building trades and other really important jobs that there's need for and a shortage of qualified skilled labor, there has to be work to be done to connect people into their jobs. So I'll ask my team to track this down. If we can get your information and see, at least in terms of your son and what's possible, we can follow up with you.
Yeah, it sounds
Plus
like
the
it's
governor's here on the 30th,
Yeah,
so
it's a
give her a
Governor
buzz.
Healy. Might be a Governor Healy question, Steve. But thank you for the call.
There are a bunch of people in the audience in orange T-shirts that say "Keep Franklin Park Public." Zoe, can we have one with a question? There are a bunch of them that want to talk, but let's have one with a question for the mayor, please. Not in an orange T-shirt. Hi, what's your name?
Good morning. My name is Renee Stacy Welch.
Hi, Renee.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
So I've lived in this community all my whole life. I was born and raised here, and I do have this question. Mayor Wu, you work extensively with Charlestown to secure roughly 43 to 48 million in community benefits and infrastructure investment tied to the Everett Stadium. Why was a comparable level of negotiating infrastructure investment for predominantly black neighborhoods, Roxbury, Jamaica Plain, Mattapan, and Dorchester, not pursued or secured in the White Stadium deal? And with that said, how do you justify us paying almost $100 million in taxes for the White Stadium while Kraft is covering the entire cost himself?
Thank you, Renee.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Renee, and appreciate you always showing up and always speaking up for the neighborhood and particularly on this issue. So I would say here once again we have a difference in I think facts of the situation, and I want to just be clear because this is a very commonly held question, and it's important to get into it because how rare is it that a community is working through two stadiums at the same time? These are very different situations, but at the same time, the principle that a major project that's going to impact a local community should bring tremendous benefit should be applied across all the cases. The first major difference is, as you just said, one is being funded privately because it's going to be privately owned and privately profiting a corporation and a company. The other, Franklin Park and White Stadium, is owned by Boston Public Schools and therefore publicly owned. It has been for 70 years since it was built, and it is going to remain so because we are in, unlike many stadium deals around the country, we did not agree to sell a stadium or to hand it over to the private sector, but in fact, there will be less than 10, and you've heard all this from me before because we've been in so many meetings together, less than 10% of the field time leased with a paying tenant, the professional women's soccer team. So the rest of the time, prioritizing students, prioritizing community needs, prioritizing large-scale events that are going to be organized by the community and by the neighbors, and it will be owned and controlled by city government, as it always has been. So this will be the only professional sports team in the country whose home turf is going to be owned by a public school district, and they're playing alongside them. In terms of the actual amount of the benefits package, so we got a way bigger package out of this White Stadium situation, even though it is still publicly owned and not going to be directly contributing to the management and ownership of a private corporation that has the ownership of the other stadium. We, at the city level, are going to be contributing some to the construction of the stadium. The women's soccer team, our tenant, is going to be contributing more than the city does, so that should be well over $100 million just there in terms of full renovations that are going to be primarily used by the city of Boston and our student athletes and our community members just in the construction process. We also have signed a detailed lease with them that will guarantee that they pay for the maintenance and operations every year forever forward. So if you look at the same 15-year window that we took a snapshot of the annual revenues that will come in from the Everett Stadium, if you apply that same 15 years, even though the revenues go on in perpetuity, but let's say for the first 15 years, it will be over $2 million a year in maintenance and operation costs. So that's $30 million right there. It will be $500,000 a year escalating with inflation for money that goes directly to Franklin Park to fulfill the action plan. Another $400,000 a year escalating with inflation just on rent that they're contributing. So that's almost $1 million every year. So 15 years, almost $15 million. So we're at $45 million just with those two pieces. That's already comparable to the other stadium deal if you don't factor in the $100+ million that they're investing in totally renovating a world-class space for our students. And then we also have a cut of concessions. I think it's 3% of the concessions that are sold, 10% of field naming rights, 10% of revenues related to other advertisements that are very specially designed so that they fit with the nature and the character of Franklin Park. But this will be a deal that is financially way, way more than the other one. It was negotiated over 2 years, so we took much longer doing it, 60 public meetings doing it, including many that I attended with you all in various spaces. And I've been in meetings with you directly. I have been in meetings with you directly. Anyway, if you're interested, we can pull up. We have every single meeting date and all of that. And all of this, again, is for a publicly owned entity that is going to be primarily used 345 days at least a year by our students and by our community.
Can I ask you a couple of follow-up questions just on White, and then we'll move on? You say a city's going to, quote, contribute some. There'll be more from the private entity, the soccer company. You still haven't released the figure, so how do you know that to be true? Do you know the figure the city is the
We
ceiling?
are working through that now because the bids have been officially received, opened, and we're in the process of reviewing them now. And so
when do you think the public will
it
know?
should be later this month.
Later this month. But so you really don't know yet, or do you know that the city's contribution is going to be more than the soccer team's contribution?
The soccer team's contribution should be more because they are.
That's what I meant to say. I'm sorry, I got it backwards.
Because basically the city and the soccer team are each renovating half of the, one grandstand and then the other side of the east grandstand and the west grandstand. Theirs, they are including all of the, very expensive upgrades for a sound system that is professional grade rather than what a high school stadium would be used for. They're putting all the finishes on to make it truly a world-class. So we are paying for the spaces that our students will use and that the community will use, and they are paying for the upgrades that will make it so that our students get to play in an incredible professional space, but that are not what the city would otherwise have paid for.
So what's their
that would be more
total
expensive.
contribution what's the total contribution of the soccer team?
It's not a dollar amount. It's finishing the entirety of their side of the stadium according to the specifications that
But
have
the
been put in
cities will
place.
be less than their commitment, is what you're
Because
saying.
we are not committing to
Okay.
building out any of the things that were needed for a full professional
What happens
build-out.
if the SJ state's highest court, which now has a case challenging this, I'm short-circuiting it, but the building of something private on public lands, what if they rule against the city? What happens?
At this point, we are well underway with construction. Site work has been done. The old stadium structure has been demolished, and we are about to, once we award the final bid packages later this month, begin the kind of vertical work on the site. And so I imagine if something were to happen and the remedy were that this deal could not move forward, for example, we already have items in the lease that are lined up that the team has to either deliver their part of the stadium completed or they have to pay, I think the amount was $45 million for the city to be able to finish it. So we are protected against any contingency if the team, this isn't going to happen because there's a lot of excitement for bringing a professional women's sports franchise as well. But if, heaven forbid, the team were to fold or decided they were going somewhere else, actually we have the legal contingencies all lined up in the lease already. However, I will say legally, we've been through multiple checkpoints at every other level of the court system and come back with very definitive, very clear legal rulings that...
But the final word will be from the SJC.
That's right, yes.
Okay.
Okay, we have a bunch of texts about the World Cup, including one from Austin, but we also, I think, have a phone call
We
from
do.
Mason in Melrose about the FIFA World Cup. Go ahead, Mason. Thank
Hey,
you
Mason.
for calling.
Well, good.
Mason, you there? Okay, well, let's say the basic thrust of the text is how are we preparing for the World Cup. They're concerned about traffic, tickets, etc.
And has the state come up with the money yet?
There are about 100 days left to go before the tournament kicks off. We won't be hosting until a little further in the group stage, but it is almost here, and so we're working through with the state and with the Boston FIFA group some of the final touches on hosting Fan Fest on City Hall Plaza and the activations and celebrations where even outside of the Gillette and the main matches, there will be places to watch, to cheer, to be in community, to support our small businesses, to celebrate cultural heritage all throughout our neighborhoods and throughout the Commonwealth as well. And I know specifically in terms of traffic and transportation, this has been a main issue. Phil Lang and the T have been working very hard on creating new capacity, so they will have to transport more riders than ever before, multiple times a day to get to and from Foxborough. And then with our downtown celebrations on City Hall Plaza, similarly working on having longer extended hours, more capacity. We'll have to do some probably temporary measures just to smooth the flow of drop-offs and shuttle buses and all of that. But we're in the final planning stages.
Is
for all
Beacon
of
Hill
it.
still screwing around, though, with the money, or have they
I believe there's another request that's still out there, and the committee still has some way to go in fundraising and securing the
Isn't it getting a
tranche
little
of
late
funding.
for this?
100 days to go. We got to get it together.
Well, didn't you, in your speech, this was the MLK Day event yesterday where you spoke about the legislature, and I think you took a bit of a swipe at them when you said that that they can find funds to host the World Cup but can't help seniors stay in their homes in Boston by reducing their taxes. I think that was a swipe.
I had a couple other lines in there too.
Oh yeah, well you
and
could certainly elaborate.
look, it's a moment of split screen in so many ways in our daily lives, right? Even when we talk about the honor and the huge economic development opportunity of having more people come to Boston than, at least in a very long time, maybe ever in one short compressed period between FIFA, Tall Ships, the 250th, and our Independence Day celebrations. But as we host everyone coming in from all around the world, people are worried about basic safety with immigration enforcement and what that will mean and how the federal government will either be enhancing or hindering local communities' efforts to create welcoming spaces. And at the same time, at the very, very local level, we're in a split screen of, Democrats across the country need to get it together. We need to show progress and leadership on affordability, on delivering things that actually matter to people. I work every day with our team so that Boston can be an effective example of not just functional government, but government that gets things done and is improving people's lives. And we have to recognize when our local residents are under tremendous stress and we can do something about it. Housing costs are through the roof. Everyone knows this in Massachusetts. We need to have more housing. We need to make sure it's affordable. But you can't have the conversation about trying to just spur more housing while ignoring property taxes that add to housing costs, because the way that state law is rigidly structured, unlike other places in the country, cities here are not in control of setting their own tax rates. We are following state law. There's this situation that happens, and our residents have been under extreme pressure. And now we have a proposal that was put in place 20 years ago when the city of Boston asked under Mayor Menino, and it worked effectively. It's temporary. It eases the burden. It helps a transition in a particular kind of economic moment that we see echoes in now. But unlike 20 years ago, our current state Senate leadership has a very different relationship with corporate interests and the real estate sector. We saw a vote go down that was, I think, 33-5 on our home rule petition that has been up there for 2 years now. I am glad we got a vote finally after 2 years. That is how our democracy should work, and I'm glad that we now were able to see where everyone stood on the record. And frankly, we got more votes than I thought because Senator Jalen, who is retiring, also seems to have voted her conscience and joined 4 out of the 6 of Boston's state senators. But we have a system set up here where the vast majority of Boston residents support residential tax relief and need it badly, and support dialing down the corporate tax break from a 4% tax break that they are currently getting to a 3% tax break, so that residents, they're still getting that break, but then residents can be saved hundreds, thousands of dollars on their tax bill just in a temporary moment of balance and transition. The vast majority of residents support this. No one is coming up to me at community meetings and say, no, please make sure they get that full 4% corporate tax break. I want to pay $700, $1,000 more in taxes. 12 out of 13 Boston city councilors have voted for this. All 16 of our Boston state representatives voted for this. 4 out of our 6 state senators voted for this. 2 have voted now against their communities.
Who?
Nick Collins and Will Brownsberger. And now this goes down, even though it only affects our community. It is reflecting the will of our community, but we're in a system where the state chooses and often is influenced by the Chamber of Commerce more than the conscience of their own communities. And we can do things. We need to do things. By all means, I am so excited that we're hosting the World Cup. We are going to squeeze every bit of value out of this. We're going to show the world who we are. The world needs to see and hear Boston's story right now. But we can do that and protect our seniors and move forward on other housing measures that have died at the State House from cities all across the Commonwealth. A transfer fee that would generate housing directly for affordable housing, rent stabilization so that people have relief right now in their communities as we're trying to build more over the next 5 years, 10 years. We have to be able to do more, and Massachusetts played an important role 250 years ago. We can't let ourselves off the hook for playing that same kind of leadership role now.
What do you think? You mentioned that we have to take a break in a second, but you mentioned you're going to be meeting at this conference of mayors with mayors across the country to talk about how to deal with Trump. Are you meeting with mayors in the Commonwealth to talk about how to deal with this legislature? I mean, you were pretty explicit here, but they essentially decided, with the exception of those 2 Boston senators, people who don't represent Boston decided they know more about what's good for Boston than the mayor and every city councilor, except one, and every state rep.
Well,
They decided.
people who represent Boston, too. It seemed
I
to
just
me
said that.
People who are in Collins and
So
Brownsberger's
what's-
district and upset should call them and tell them.
What's the strategy for this? Because there's been an endless string of their rejection of what you and the council have sent up. That's, by the way, on the rent stabilization thing, I haven't seen other polls, overwhelmingly supported by the people who actually live here. What are you going to do?
Something's got to give, and this is not just Boston. This is a frustration that I know and hear from communities everywhere. It's not that any of us wants to be antagonistic or doing anything except for collaborating with our partners who are aligned on values. But we have a system where we see the state Senate putting more energy into opposing a common sense proposal and rejecting it and shutting it down from one municipality than if only a fraction of that energy went into finding statewide solutions for cities that are being crushed by revenue issues, given the way state tax laws are structured and how inflation and healthcare costs have been eating into the funding that's needed for teachers and police officers and first responders and basic city services. We're all going through this right now, and there are a number of ballot initiatives that have been put forward more than ever before because people just feel like there needs to be a release valve somewhere. We need to see action. We need to see relief. And one way or the other, whether legislatively or through the ballot, which frankly does not produce as good outcomes because it is then one hammer applied across the entire state instead of nuanced legislation that's worked out through ongoing dialogue and process. It's one vote, and whoever gets the language up there, that is what goes, unless they will, tweak it afterwards. But we're feeling that sense of frustration, and Massachusetts has to be a leader in this moment. We can't point the finger at the Trump administration and say they're making life horrible on all these measures, while all we do is cheerlead, but then not deliver real action and real results.
Is this because they're owned by corporate interests? That seems to be what you're saying.
I have learned a lot over the last 2 years of this process, and I think one is that the structure is very much, whether originally designed back in the, Irish Catholic Boston versus Brahmin Protestant State House era, or reinforced in every generation since then with this split where the economic interests work in Boston but do not live here and have greater influence over a wider swath of the Commonwealth, where they may have more interests and more ability to provide resources and host political fundraisers and things like that. We do see a very different relationship now between the state Senate and those interests than we did 20 years ago when this passed, and when other communities have needed other issues to happen as well. And so I think the other lesson for me is that we have seen a shift in our larger corporate and business community too. So
What shift
20
have we
years
seen?
ago, there were business leaders who stepped out from the beginning and said, we understand that we're in this together, and that when our residents, meaning our coworkers, our workforce, our customers, our community, when they are destabilized because of this quirk of tax law, all of a sudden providing a huge shock and spike in taxes, that's bad for business too. And many of them, and Bob Rivers has talked about this trend also, businesses used to have much more loyalty and responsibility solely here because they were headquartered here. And as many businesses have become nationalized, they now have to think about how things they do here will be received by their shareholders who are connected to Florida or other places around the country. And there's also been giants in the community like Jack Connors, who we miss, who I miss every day, a Rosendale guy, someone who's deeply lived and breathed Boston and felt that responsibility to give back and see the big picture, not just competitiveness as an on-off switch in terms of how low can we push taxes for the corporate community as the only thing that we're going to lobby for, but that we all are interconnected in needing a thriving business community, needing thriving jobs and economic opportunities, especially in such a competitive and fluid time as this. But that ultimately depends on people being secure, our residents, our neighbors, being able to take care of their families so that they can give their best to also create enterprise and come to work and put energy into that new innovation and life-saving change. This has always been the place that we change the world, make a difference, but we need everyone to understand that that is a collective endeavor that is going to be focused on putting down the foundations for our long-term to work.
Before we get back to the cause, I think you have something there.
Oh, yes.
This
This
to do with
is
Boston Family
hot off
Days.
the presses. So this is our very new
Thank you.
Boston Family Days passport book that will be ready in time for February's Boston Family Days at the beginning of the month, the first and second Sundays of the month. Institutions across the city are free to any student growing up in Boston and two of their guests or family members that they would like to take. So now there's a passport that reflects all of the institutions that are participating, and each one of them has a special stamp book. So this one actually is the Franklin Park Zoo, a lot of Franklin Park today. And so you would go, I'm going to find the right page, and you can go and get your own stamp there. And the
cool.
goal is that every family, every child growing up in this city should feel like they own all of the opportunities and the world-class experiences across the city. So go check these out.
How do they get these things?
These will be at the institutions
Okay.
themselves, whether the aquarium, the Children's Museum, or at Boston Public Schools.
Great. Larry in West Roxbury, you're on with Mayor Wu. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure.
So I'm a retired special educator, special ed administrator, so I love public schools. I've worked in public schools all my life, and I support and understand the need to consolidate public schools in Boston with old buildings that need to be done over and not enough students to fill them all up. So I have an idea for what to do with extra public school buildings that are going to be closed for public school.
What's that?
So my wife's an artist. I've lived with an artist like all of my adult life, and I think there's a huge need for living and housing and working spaces for artists. You get two bangs for your buck on two different levels. You have a place for people to work and to live, who commute, who give back to the city of Boston, and instead of going to New York, which like 80% of them do, they'll stay here.
How about it?
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for the idea, and I think we will get to that point. I want to just give a little bit more sense of what's immediately coming next, because there are a lot of complicated pieces with our school buildings. These are really important hubs within our community, and it's actually not as simple as we're just closing a building and because it's not needed, and students are kind of getting consolidated into the existing other buildings, and then we don't need to do anything with that building anymore, so it should find a new use. Eventually, I think we may get to that point, but right now, more often than not, what's happening is two schools, for example, that might be either under-enrolled or one that might be too small and therefore not able to offer the full range of experiences would merge together, and then a fully renovated building would then house both of those schools in their new school community. And so we're actually renovating and creating a lot of new spaces, or refurbishing and making like new existing spaces. At the pace that we intend to do this at, right, previously it was one school would get done over every 5 to 7 years, if that. And that's why right now we have more school construction and renovation projects underway than the last 40 years combined. In order to do this at a good clip, we will need spaces for swing space to rotate students out of, because the challenge of renovating a school building, unlike other buildings that you could theoretically just shut down for a while to do the construction, is students still have to learn that whole period, and so you have to find some other accommodation, and only doing construction during the summer stretches it out way too much. So there are lots of other needs that we might have, but at whatever point we have extra buildings that are not appropriate for school use in some way, that will be their first priority if it was a former school building. There is a public disposition process. It involves the city council, it involves public meetings, and it in fact should line up with our larger planning process that's underway to identify what each neighborhood needs. Not just how tall housing should be and where it should go and how many units, but is a particular neighborhood missing artists, co-work, studio space? Is it missing a resource for young kids in a playground? Is it missing a grocery store? And so our planning is meant to identify how every neighborhood should be a walkable, fully accessible community, and the buildings should then follow that purpose rather than kind of be pulled out on their own.
Speaking of, thank you, Larry. Speaking of housing, could you briefly explain to people what happened at Whittier, this flat 9 thing?
Oh yeah, the AMP project was just finished. So this was I think 4-phase redevelopment of a really important public housing community in Roxbury. It kicked off a while ago under Governor Patrick and President Obama with the first tranche of funds that were awarded. And it has now, since this was the very final phase that was completed, and following through on all of that over many years, where something like 200 original units have now been more than doubled into a thriving community, fully renovated homes, supports and community spaces built into that. And so we were proud to cut the ribbon on the residents moving in.
You know, every time an elected official talks about a good idea that I assume everybody would agree is a good idea, the first thing that comes to my mind, I'm guessing yours, is it replicable? And the bad news here is the first, I think it was 30 million, as you said, did come from HUD under Obama. So another flat 9 or a replica is unlikely without federal seed money, which sure as hell is not happening. Is that fair?
We have to get through the next 3 years, but we can hope and organize until then. However, even since then, the federal government, I mean, for the last 40 years, the federal government has been doing less and less and less on housing. And particularly when it comes to public housing, it's been a fight just to get resources to maintain existing units that were initially federally created. So even in recent years, the city of Boston has been putting in direct city dollars for the Mary Ellen McCormick, for example, or the Mildred Haley development, for example. These were all seeded with significant $50 million of city dollars, ARPA city dollars going to the Mildred Haley development. And this is a model that has worked to take an existing footprint, use public funding to spark additional public-private partnership where often there's more housing than there existed before, built on, either expanded or built on top, that tends to be mixed income and that can self-subsidize and keep those units maintained in perpetuity.
You know, while we're on the subject of housing, just a little background. People may know there's a section of Tremont Street right across from where the police headquarters is, Parcel 3. A lot of plans over the years to do some development there that have all kind of fallen apart. And lately there was another $1 billion life science and affordable housing project. And there were a lot of people involved in that. Amari Paris Jeffries, they were looking for some space there for Embrace Boston and stuff. Anyway, you're taking some flack over this from the Globe, and Shirley Leung, who's with us all the time. It's not going to happen apparently because of the Madison Park rebuild, and she thinks that this was a bad idea. Steamroll was the word she used, and suggested the idea that why not both and fix Madison Park and do the affordable housing, economic development, life sciences, et cetera, development.
Shirley has it wrong here in terms of the initial framing, which it's not true that the P3 economic development project isn't happening because we chose to move forward with Madison Park. The P3 economic development project was not happening on its own, and they have had the designation for 3 years where it's a parcel of public land, which has a very raw and you know, we wouldn't make these decisions today, but the land that was originally taken from community members under urban renewal through eminent domain to, at that point, build a highway through Roxbury and the South End, and that community members mobilized to stop. But that parcel of land that was generated, which was meant to have a school complex, economic development, and healthcare, the school project, Madison Park, was built and has now been so many years in existence that it is crumbling and needing major renovation. And meanwhile, the economic development parcel has been vacant this entire time through multiple iterations of community members being clear that this was there's a strong need and jobs should be here and there should be civic uses and all of that. So the parcel was designated after a community process that happened through and right after COVID, where lab space was hot in Boston and able to throw off enough profits that could then subsidize affordable housing and all of these other things. That is no longer the case. The economics do not work. Lab space is at 30% vacancy, and this project for multiple years now was not able to advance or make meaningful progress towards a groundbreaking, even with city conversations about using some funding from our accelerator fund to help spark this. There was just no way, given the original conception of the economics of the project, that it would have any hope of moving forward at any time in the next cycle until lab at some point comes back, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years down the line. This was something that wasn't happening. At the same time, we got what everyone said would never happen, right? State partnership through the MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority, to fully redevelop Madison Park. This will be a tremendous economic contribution to the city and the budget, making Madison feasible. And because those parcels are adjacent, it will end up, if looking at the redevelopment of Madison, I mentioned swing space earlier, in order for the students to keep learning during the period of construction, either you have to pay for swing space elsewhere, or we were trying to contort ourselves into building the new building on the athletic fields so that students could keep learning, and then once the new building was up, move the students into that building, then knock down the old building, rebuild the athletic field. Meanwhile, that would result in a layout for the school that's not ideal because the main entrance would now be on a small residential street. The athletic fields would be taken off for 4+ years or however long construction lasts. And now we have a parcel of land that wasn't going to be used for a feasible economic development plan under the current project proposal available to help us maneuver what the right layout is to solve potentially some really challenging questions for Madison, and then have a school there moving forward that will spark an actually feasible economic development project. So the long story short is that the school and economic development will both happen. And now they have a chance of actually both moving forward to build wealth in our community, to reinforce and make real the dreams of community members who for 60+ years have been working on this parcel. But it has to happen in the right order now, and we're going to continue working on it so that we're not just prolonging a pipe dream. It became where promises were made to the city and to the community from a developer who said this is going to fund all of these additional things, a free nonprofit center, affordable housing. That hasn't been true for some time, and it's time to come to terms that those promises are not able to be delivered on by that developer, and now we are finding a way to make something actually work.
Okay, we only have 40 seconds left. Please tell me you're not betting like a bowl of clam chowder with the mayor of Denver over the game. You're not, are you?
We haven't spoken about it yet.
that's
Yeah.
excellent.
I'll see him in DC though.
You will. Madam Mayor, we really appreciate your time. Congratulations on your second inauguration. We'll see you next month.
Thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
thank you very much for coming in and joining us, and thank you very much for my Boston Family Days little passport.